Growing up, I never fully understood my mother's inclination for favoritism. While I, 37, was merely there, my younger sister Bethany, 32, seemed to be the focus of her existence. Mom, 57, was probably always more protective of Bethany since she was a sick infant, but protectiveness turned into an unhealthy obsession. Bethany experienced royal treatment. Mom would do her homework, hand-feed her till she was in middle school, and even let her miss classes if she felt like it. Me too. I had food, clothing, a roof over my head, the very minimum. Dad, God rest his soul, was the only one that truly saw me. Usually whispering, "Don't tell your mom," he would take me to movies and hand me more money. The preference was obvious. I once asked for a bike for Christmas. At the last minute, Bethany realized she also wanted one. Who acquired socks and who the bright new bike? Mom observed, "You're older. You can save money for one yourself." That fairly captured my early years. Bethany acquired all she could have wanted, and I was supposed to be the responsible one. It was quite draining. Part 2. Distance and escape. The best decision I ever made was to leave for college in another place. At last I was able to breathe. There is no more vying for attention or ongoing comparison to Bethany. Perhaps I could be just me. I started a life for myself, found work, and turned my whole attention to the future. Dad stayed in touch, but Mom? That was it. The sporadic Facebook comment and a birthday text. To be honest, I had no interest either. Her continuous criticism and partiality were gone from me. Bethany stayed at home until she married at 26. Mom was still quite active in her life even then, calling 5 times a day, and showing up unannounced to run grocery shopping. Even seeing from far was stifling. Part 3. Dad's disease and their ignorance. Dad became ill 11 years ago. He dismissed a prolonged cough as a cold, then experienced exhaustion and dyspnea. Still, he continued to work, always putting everyone else first. Mom hardly noticed, buried in her yoga and spa days. Bethany, who had returned home following the breakup of her first marriage, seemed not very bothered either. Trying to establish my job, I was living in another place, but realized something was amiss. Over our calls, his voice sounded less strong, though he would dismiss my worries. I knew he wasn't good. His lung infection was severe when he at last visited the hospital. I dropped everything and hurried back home. And what would you guess? Dad lay in the hospital weak and alone, while Mom and Bethany were experiencing manicures. Every moment I could, I was with him. Mom would sometimes drop in, but Bethany? She said seeing him like that was too hard. I was juggling everything, checking his comfort level, adjusting his medicines, consulting doctors. Mom not being more involved infuriated me. She had all the time in the world, yet she behaved as though visiting a hospital caused great trouble. Fourth, the will and the wedding. After a week, Dad returned home but needed ongoing care. Mom was untrustworthy. Although she was meant to stand up, she would vanish for hours, forget his prescription, and even put a salon visit ahead of picking up his oxygen tank, a top priority. Bethany was no better. She retreated to her room, afraid to confront Dad's illness. I finally resigned from my work to spend full time looking after him. Dad deserved better, and I couldn't rely on Mom or Bethany to do it. I stayed with him, helped with his physical treatment, and cooked for him. Though it was tiring, I adored him. Mom tried harder as Dad grew ill, but it was too late. Sitting by his bedside, hooked to her phone, she would chat with Bethany or post on social media. Bethany would make excuses to leave, even then, and only visited when Mom pushed her. A few months later, Dad died. There I was, with the nurse and some of his buddies, Bethany and Mom, absent. Mom was at some wellness retreat, and Bethany was out with pals. Dad's attorney called me regarding his will a few weeks following the funeral. I had low expectations, perhaps a souvenir or a modest inheritance, but Dad had left everything to me, the house, his savings, everything. Mom and Bethany came away empty-handed. Their rage was evident. Bethany shouted at the attorney, and Mom called to demand a cut from me. I objected. I stopped them. Their sense of entitlement choked them. Part 5. Repossession. Eventually, I relocated to a new city, found my spouse, and began a family. For his work, we even relocated overseas. It was a clean beginning. I felt no need to share my life with Mom or Bethany. Years later, Mom unexpectedly showed up at my house. She wept, stated she wanted to be in my daughter's life, and apologized. Though I gave her a chance, I did not trust her. Things were good for a bit. Gifts, video conferences. Then the hints began to show clearly. casual remarks about how difficult life was for her, since I took everything on her financial difficulties. Then there was the phone call. Bethany was preparing for her second marriage. Mom continued endlessly on how significant Bethany's wedding was to her, and how it marked a fresh start. I was hoping you could help out with the expenses. Considering everything your father left you, it's the least you could do, she said, then dropped the bomb. I was mute. Not even invited to the wedding. I hadn't spoken to Bethany in more than 10 years. Mom's reply, "Oh, we expected you wouldn't want to travel with a baby." I outright objected, saying I had an obligation to aid Bethany, that I was hoarding the family fortune. She tried guilt-tripping me. I advised her to get in touch with Bethany, should she need money. Mom persevered. Texts, voicemails, all about how I was disappointing Bethany, ruining her big day. It felt like I owed them something. When I needed support, though, where were they? Where were they when Dad became ill? Mom's telling me Bethany had already paid deposits and reserved the venue, depending on me to meet the expenses, was the last straw. You were everything we needed, she said. That's it. She should work things out on her own, I advised. She made threats to cut me out from her life. I laughed. You already treat me like I don't exist. What difference does it make? I hung up to block her. Part 6. Taking back my life. Following the wedding drama, I passed my breaking point. For more than 10 years, Mom and Bethany had been rent-free in the house Dad left for me. After Dad passed away, I had believed it would be simpler to avoid the drama of evicting them. They were entitled, though unappreciative and rude. Seeing how much I cared for him in his last months, Dad bequeathed me the house. I see you and I appreciate you, he had remarked. Hoping they would change, I would let them stay. Mom behaved as if the house belonged to her, never offering to pay rent, even though she leased a room to fund her own costs. Enough was enough. I got eviction paperwork and called my attorney. Mom shot. She yelled, "You cannot evict me! I have spent 45 years calling this place home." I gently advised her she had 30 days to go. Of course, Bethany got involved and called me avaricious and merciless. You only cared for Dad to obtain the inheritance, she spat. It was pathetic. It was she who hardly saw Dad during his dying process. Mom did everything to get me to have second thoughts. Nothing worked. Threats, guilt trips, even tears about how she was too old to start over. The eviction progressed. I had the house refurbished and cleaned, then hired a property manager. Knowing that someone valued the place at last made one feel wonderful. Bethany's detailed wedding preparations came apart. She had to downgrade to a town hall event, presumably embarrassing her and her fiancé. Their union began to fall apart. Mom then moved in with Bethany, and things deteriorated rapidly. At last, Mom's relentless meddling forced Bethany's husband to issue her an ultimatum. It's me or your mother. Bethany made her mother her choice. Mom, predictably, tried to get in touch. I banned her everywhere else, so she sent an email. She reflected on how difficult life had been and on how she had always tried her best as a mother. I gave no thought to responding. According to what I know, Mom is burning out her welcome everywhere she goes while Bethany's marriage is on the rocks. And for me, I'm good. Renting the house has brought financial consistency. We are arranging a family vacation, and my husband and I are doing nicely in our professions. With regard to Mom and Bethany, they made decisions, and today they are suffering with the results. Knowing that their turmoil is no longer my concern also releases the most freeing power. Starting college seemed like breaking out from a cage. Miles separating me from that claustrophobic residence, miles separating me from the continual reminders of Bethany's preferred status. Nestled among undulating hills, this little college town was far from the life I knew. I could breathe, first of all. I chose my own clothes, ate when hungry, and stayed late chatting with pals without someone scrutinizing every action. I chose my own classes, started a photography club, and even went hiking with some total strangers who became friends. Nobody knew me as the girl constantly disregarded or Bethany's older sister, just me, and it was outstanding. Every Sunday, Dad would phone with a kind, proud voice. He would find out about my studies, friends, and recent carpentry project. Those calls were a lifeline, a reminder that someone appreciated me for exactly who I was. Mom, on the other side, was a far-off echo. A birthday card bearing a bland greeting, a brief remark on a Facebook picture. You also know what? I missed her not at all. Not her judgment, not her continual comparisons, not the way her eyes appeared to move past me, seeking Bethany. In that small village, I developed my life. After graduating, I worked at a nearby newspaper and even began seeing David, a sweet and gentle man. Though not ideal, life was mine, my own. Bethany at last left the house to get married. Mom was still hovering, calling many times a day, and showing up to help with housework. She was 26. It was like seeing a bird attempt flight with a weight attached to one of its legs. It made me hurt even from far away, for the life Bethany had never truly experienced. But that was their tangential web, their dance. I was at last at liberty. Years turned by, seasons changed, leaves turned, snow dropped, and melted. I started a life with David that was full of quiet satisfaction and joy. We prepared dinners together, investigated the nearby woods from our modest apartment, and fantasized about owning a little house with a garden. The calls from Dad then began to vary. His voice became faint, reedy from previously great strength and consistency. He would cough, a hard, rattling sound that rang through the phone. Of course, he would discount it. Just a cold, he would declare, or maybe allergies. But I realized, knowledge comes from a daughter. He began to sound worn out, his words slowing down with large pauses between. He would tell me about his day and about the furniture he was creating, but the delight was lost in favor of a tiredness that permeated the phone lines. I pushed him toward a doctor's visit. "I'm fine," he would insist, but his voice betrayed him with the trembling. The phone rang late one evening. Mom, her voice tight with a strange desperation. "Your father's in the hospital," she declared. "It is his lungs." My heart started to feel frigid. My head whirled with concern and a weird premonition. I scheduled the first flight home. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and anxiety, and was sterile. Dad lay little and weak in the bed, his breathing laboring. From his arms, tubes slithered. Machinery beeped non-stop. Mom was there, seated in a chair, with a pale, drawn-in face. Her eyes, however, seemed to be looking far away, as though she were observing a drama play out, a tragedy that did not really impact her. Additionally, Bethany, nowhere to be found now. Mom added, her voice flat, "She can't bear to see him like this. It is too upsetting for her." I intended to yell, to shake her and help her to understand. Still, the words stopped in my throat. What good was the point? She wouldn't see, wouldn't feel the anxiety that tore at me, the urgent need to hang on to the man who had seen me, loved without conditions. I stayed with Dad night and day. I visited the physicians, interpreted their jargon, changed his pillows, and held his hand while the coughing episodes tore across his body. Mom would fly in and out, her visits short, interspersed with phone calls and hushed corridor discussions. She responded, "He's in good hands with the nurses." Should I just sit here? What good would that do? One afternoon, my heart weighty, I glanced at her. With a hollow voice, "Yes, Mom," I said, "supporting your husband, being there for him, exactly what you should do." She did not really though, not the manner he required, not the way he ought to have. When Dad returned home from the hospital, illness hung over him. He was weaker, his breath was faint, his steps stammered. The doctor declared he required round-the-clock treatment, and I knew I couldn't let Mom and Bethany handle him. I thus stayed. I packed a bag, quit my work, and returned to that house, loaded with so many mixed memories. Mom, bless her heart, and try. She would fluff his pillows, bring Dad tea, and fuss over him. Her efforts, nevertheless, were fragmented and ephemeral. She would vanish for hours, and then come back, carrying shopping bags and stories of spa treatments. Her mind always elsewhere, she would miss his prescription and lose his oxygen tank. Bethany withdrew in line with convention. Her days would pass imprisoned in her chamber, the television flickering under the door. She would say, "It's too hard to see him like this," her eyes reflecting Mom's, but with an extra layer of young avoidance. I started to be Dad's anchor. I helped him with his exercises, made his meals, and read to him in the afternoons when the sunlight slanted through the windows. We discussed his ambitions, his early years, and his regrets. He related tales of his own father, a gentle guy who loved the earth, and about his grandpa, a stonemason who constructed churches with just his own hands. In those peaceful times, I saw a flutter of the man I had always known, the man who loved me, and I knew, with conviction buried deep in my bones, that I was doing the right thing. Still, It was difficult. All of it weighed down on me. The continual anxiety, lack of sleep, and loneliness that crept in when the house went quiet at night. I missed David, his soft touch, his easy laughing. I missed my life, the one I had painstakingly created. And then arrived the day Dad's skin became clammy and his breath became shallow. I phoned Bethany, Mom, but neither answered. Dad left while they were out shopping, getting their nails done, living their lives. With me holding his hand, his friends gathered around his bed, exchanging stories and tears. He passed away. Arriving hours later, Mom and Bethany had hollow, disrespectful, fake grief on their faces. The funeral passed in a haze. My heart a leaden weight in my chest. I went through it like a ghost. Mom and Bethany performed, their voices muffled with sorrow and tears running freely, but I sensed their eyes' emptiness, their lack of real grief. Dad's lawyer phoned a few weeks later, the will's reading. I expected little, perhaps a modest bequest, a bit of his workshop to honor him. Dad had left me everything, though. His house, his savings, his tools, his acreage. Mom and Bethany got nothing at all. The quiet in the lawyer's office was intolerable. Then the explosion arrived. Mother's objections, Bethany's charges. They raged at the unfairness of it all, the injustice. Numb, I sat there watching them, and I realized at that same instant, Dad watched their apathy and disregard. He had experienced my sacrifice and love. He had also made a decision. He had picked me. I left that town, the place I had buried my father, and the traces of my early years. David and I relocated to a busy city, where skyscrapers scraped the heavens and 1,000 other languages hummed in the air. We came onto a little apartment we could call our own, with riverfront views. I plunged myself into my job, the words like a salve over the hurts in my spirit. David was my rock. His love burned consistently throughout the night. We created a decent life full of dreams, shared and laughing. Then one rainy afternoon, Mom showed up on my front porch. She appeared older, gray streaks in her hair, creases on her face I could not recall. Her eyes, though, were the same, pining, frantic, her voice cracking. I was wrong, she said. I made mistakes. I want to be in your life as well as that of my granddaughter. I gazed at her, a stranger passing for my mother. The years had blunted the edges of my fury, but the hurt stayed, a deep ache pulsing in rhythm with my pulse. I didn't believe her, but a tiny bit of me, the portion still yearning for a mother's love, murmured that perhaps she had changed. I therefore let her in. At first it was embarrassing, like two strangers negotiating a minefield of unspoken words and buried resentments, but we gently, gingerly, created a brittle bridge. She would send handcrafted toys, small clothes, and presents for my daughter. We would have video conferences, her face lighting up at seeing her granddaughter, and for some time it felt good, standard even. Still, the tranquility did not last. Starting softly at first, the whispers resembled the rustle of leaves before a storm, notes about how difficult things were for her, her struggle, how I had everything. That was followed by the phone call. "Bethany's getting married," she declared, her voice sharp with a false cheerfulness. My heart dropped. Not since Dad's funeral, not in years, have I communicated with Bethany. I became terrified thinking of seeing her and of confronting the echoes of the past. Mom, unaware of my uneasiness, kept on about the wedding, about how delighted Bethany was, about how it marked a new beginning, and then the inevitable demand, her voice faltering to a conspiratorial whisper. "I was hoping you could help out with the expenses. Consider all your father left you. It's the least you could do." Emphasizing entitlement and expectation, the words hung in the air. I experienced a flash of scorching, furious wrath. My voice stiff, I continued, "I'm not giving you money for Bethany's wedding. Mother begged, but she needs your help. She's your sister. She's the sister who left Dad during his dying," I shot back. "The sister I haven't spoken with in years. She accused me of stealing her inheritance." Mom experimented in guilt, in manipulation, even in tears. Still, I stood strong. I have been meeting their demands and whims for a lifetime. Including my own pain, I had given them everything, and I was over here. The click at the end of the phone call reflected the finality of my choice. Silence followed. I deleted her emails, deactivated her number, and kicked her from my life. It was time to write a fresh chapter free from the shadow of the past, to recover my own story. Time allegedly heals all kinds of wounds. Some scars, however, persist. Though they fade, get less jagged, and less inflammatory, they nevertheless serve as a memory of fights waged and lessons learnt. The years I severed relations with Mom and Bethany were like coming out of a protracted winter. The globe seemed more colorful, the air cleaner. I could breathe free from their demands, weight, and constant drama. David and I enjoyed pleasant and laughing-filled lives. Our baby blossomed, a brilliant energy that cheered every inch of our life. As we had hoped, we moved into a little house with a garden. From the ground, I nurtured life by planting vegetables, herbs, and flowers, marveling as small seeds emerged and stretched for the sun. Dad's house's rental income gave us security and a basis for our future. It felt fitting, somehow, that the sight of so much suffering was now enabling my own family to lead better lives. News from Mom and Bethany floated in through far-off relatives, whispers on the breeze. Bethany's marriage collapsed from her own doing. Mom, true to tradition, went from relative to relative, wearing down her welcome with her relentless complaints and demands. I experienced a flash of gratification, a basic sense of fairness. Mostly, though, I felt nothing, just a calm emptiness. No animosity or rage. Their decisions no longer fell under my purview. They were no weight for me to bear. One day a letter showed up, Mom's familiar, weak, and unsure handwriting. She wrote of regret, of difficulty, of a need to reconnect. I once read it, then stashed it unread in a drawer. Once damaged, some relationships cannot be healed. Once suffered, certain wounds leave scars that never really fade. I decided to center on the life I had created, the love all around me, the future open field-like before me. I opted to forgive for myself rather than for them, to let the hurt, the rage, and the echoes of a past that no longer define me clear themselves. And in that releasing, I discovered peace, a peaceful spot in the forest where the air smelled of pine and moist ground, and the sun dappled the leaves, where I might at last be entire and free, really myself. The trip had been protracted, the road dotted with thorns. Still, I had come out smarter, stronger, more resilient, and I realized that I had at last found my way home as I gazed out at the globe and at the life I had fashioned. Story 2. Hey everybody, I need some objective view of a matter involving my sister. My sister Clara is 27. I am AmITheA, 30. 6 months or so ago, Clara lost her graphic design job. Right now, this is a difficult field since layoffs are occurring everywhere. Hence, she has had great difficulty landing a new job. She has been a barista to help pay for things, but her pay hardly meets her basic needs. I volunteered to assist her with her rent, while she looked for a better job since I share an apartment with my partner and work a steady job as a software engineer. She was quite appreciative, and we decided on a sum that would pay her rent and leave her with some more for groceries and other needs. She seemed to me to be using the money sensibly. She has always detested working as a barista, so I figured she was devoting all her effort to land a new job. She discussed pulling up extra shifts to get our parents a decent anniversary present when we last saw each other personally. This made me want to help her even more since it made me think she was basically living paycheck to pay. Then out of the blue I received a note from our cousin Leo. He remarked, in passing, Clara was in Rome. I was really perplexed. He handed me screen grabs from Clara's Instagram when I asked him what he was talking about. She apparently had barred our parents and me as none of us could view her stories or postings. Pictures of her in the Colosseum, the Trevi Fountain, and other famous sites abound. My uncertainty turned right away into rage. How might she save for a European trip? We live in Sydney, and not including lodging, food, or other expenses, round-trip flights alone run a lot. I felt betrayed. She had not only flown on a costly trip, but also deliberately tried to keep it from me. Telling her I knew she was in Rome, and that she obviously didn't need my aid with rent anymore. If she could afford a European vacation, I sent her a few brief notes. She called me right away, almost in tears, asking not to have her cut off. She said her new boyfriend was paying for everything, and she was on the trip with him. She insisted she still needed the money for rent, and that if I stopped supporting her, she would have to move out. I hung up telling her that was her current issue. I was furious, even though I admit hanging was a little immature. About her new boyfriend, I know very little. Perhaps he is quite affluent, but the fact that she went to such great measures to keep the trip from me begged significant questions. Though for now, I have blocked her number. I want to have a serious talk with her when she returns. She has been getting in touch with other family members since then, who believe I am being overly critical. and ought to have the benefit of the doubt. They seem to believe I will abandon her homeless. This seems like it will become a major family drama project. I truly need an outside view. Once I cooled off somewhat, I realized I owed it to myself, if not to Clara, to hear her version of the tale. I phoned her again after cleared her number. She took up practically right away, still faltering in voice. She said the trip had been a pretty last-minute affair. Ethan, her boyfriend, was already scheduled to travel to Europe for business, and he kindly volunteered to cover her plane ticket so she can travel with him. She claimed she felt she had to seize this chance. When I asked her about the other costs, motels, meals, activities, she stated Ethan was paying most of it, and she had just had to pay a nominal amount. This is when things became rather more difficult. She became defensive when I inquired where she had obtained the money she did contribute. She claimed to have saved some money from her barista employment, and felt it unfair of me to criticize her for seeking a vacation. She claimed not to have informed me this as well. She understood she would offend me. I raised the clear issue. Why hadn't she used her money saved to help with her rent? She might have depended less on me. Her reply was that she didn't want to completely drain her savings, since the amount she had saved wasn't significant enough to significantly affect her rent situation over long run. She also claimed that following months of hardship and at a job she hated, she deserved some enjoyment. I then questioned her about the anniversary present for our parents. She stammered a little and acknowledged that the money meant for the present had really been used for the trip. Stung. It felt dishonest, as though she had used the gift to stifle any mistrust. I underlined my position on the rent. I warned her I wouldn't be paying any more until we had a suitable conversation when she got back. I did agree to talk about it then, but I also made it plain that before I thought about giving her another cent, I would have to review her bank statements. Should it prove that she had been lying to me about her financial status all along, not only would I stop supporting her, but also I would want her to reimburse the money I had previously given her. The whole talk made me uncertain, given the tension she had been under. On one hand, I could appreciate her need for a vacation, given their short relationship history. I also understood her hesitation to ask Ethan for help with rent. She said he comes from a very rich family, and she didn't want to seem as like she was profit from him. That piece, at least, felt real, but the sensation of being misled persisted. The silence, the banned social media accounts, the false remarks regarding the gift, all of which presented a picture of someone trying to hide their tracks, knowing they were doing something wrong. It was about the dishonesty rather than the vacation itself. That was the really troubling thing. It made me doubt anything she had told me over the last few months. The confidence we shared seems broken. Few days later, Clara came back from Rome, and at last we had the in-person meeting I had been so looking forward. We convened at a neutral site, a little cafe close to my place. Wanting some emotional space, I wanted to avoid having the talk at either of our homes. I began by coolly repeating my emotions. I explained, not offended about the vacation itself, but rather about her handling of everything. That had wounded me. The lies, the secrets, the manipulation. She had betrayed that trust since I taught her that, in any relationship, especially between siblings, trust is the cornerstone. Clara listened silently, hatred and regret mixed in her gaze. She said apologies, but they seemed empty. She kept saying she had only wanted to have some fun, without me evaluating her, not meant to hurt me. She insisted that it was too early in their relationship to seek for such a large financial favor, and that asking Ethan for help with rent was out of the question. After that arrived the moment of truth. I asked her to forward her bank records to me. She paused, obviously uneasy, but finally followed instructions. My doubts were verified as I perused the transactions. She had really saved more than she had first let on. Though not very much, it was enough to clearly help her pay her rent during the last few months. She had been purposefully underplaying her savings in order to get as much support from me. The letdown really got to me. It was about the willful dishonesty now, not only about the money. I felt let down and used. I expected her to pay back the part of the rent she could have paid herself with her own savings. I told her I would not be giving her any more money. Again defensive, Clara accused me of being merciless and harsh. She said she still needed support, that she was still battling. She had chosen, and she had to live with the results. I reminded her. I also noted that maybe it was time for her to have an honest chat with Ethan about her financial condition if her relationship with him was as committed as she claimed. The chat came to a nasty end. Clara left the cafe crying, and I felt emotionally spent walking home. Although I felt I had done the right thing, it did not lessen the agony of the circumstances. The family drama that followed developed as I had anticipated in the next weeks. Understanding my annoyance, our parents tried to be middlemen, pushing me to forgive Clara and keep supporting her. Other families sided with Clara, charging me of being unduly harsh and unsympathetic. I felt as though everyone's story had me as the villain. I stayed on my ground in face of pressure, emphasizing the loss of trust rather than the money itself. I communicated my thinking to everyone who would hear. Certain family members started to see my point of view slowly. Clara did talk to Ethan about her money at last. Though I'm not sure the specifics of their exchange, I know he refused to offer her rent payment. Rather, Clara started looking actively for a second job and started working longer hours at the cafe. She was going through a terrible period, but at last, she was starting to own her circumstances. The strain between Clara and me relaxed with time. We resumed our conversation, first warily, then more freely. Though we are working on it, we have not yet rebuilt the lost confidence. Even if they are relatives, I have gained a great insight on establishing limits and assigning responsibility. And Clara, I think she has gained a great insight on the need of integrity and the need of owning her acts. Though it was a difficult experience, it finally pushed us both toward personal development.